I mean, no right answer to this, but just curious. How many of you have diabetes mellitus or know someone with diabetes mellitus? Okay, so what we see here is that, well, it looks like some of you don't know somebody who has diabetes, but about half of, or actually exactly half of us who have responded, we know someone who has diabetes in our family, or we're affected by diabetes ourselves. So this is the topic of today. Today's hot topic is diabetes mellitus. Now, what is diabetes mellitus? Well, what we have to do is like review some of this other things, and this is why I talked so much about blood glucose and blood sugar in the previous lecture. So, the normal fasting range, again, fasting is when you don't take any food for a while, and it depends on the institution. But this is a well-established normal fasting range, 70 to 110 mg per deciliter. Now, hyperglycemia and hypoglycemia, again, hyper meaning above, hypo meaning below. So above normal levels of blood sugar is what we call high blood sugar, and this is above that normal limit. Whereas hypoglycemia, this is below that normal limit. And what we have here, so yeah, if you have your blood glucose below 70, this is when you have all the symptoms of hypoglycemia, including like shakiness, nervous, kind of like feeling disoriented, sweating, and like, yeah, and I think that what former student of mine described it best. It feels like your whole world is melting. And then what we have here, so actually there was a really good question last lecture. So what is like the absolute lowest it can go? So I looked that up, and yeah, so what we have here is like if you get down here below the 20, this is when you get neuronal death and brain death. So hypoglycemia, everything below that lower limit, again 70, but as you dip lower and lower, what you see is like decreased cognition, so affecting how you think. And also, yeah, if it below this, you start losing consciousness, and then you die below when you get to the teens in terms of your blood glucose in, yeah, mgs per deciliter. All right, and we also covered glucagon as well. So insulin lowers blood sugar, but what about glucagon? Well, this is one of those cases where you have a pair of hormones and they oppose each other. So these are released by alpha cells, and instead of lowering your blood glucose, it's going to liberate more of the nutrients into your blood, including glucose, but also other things like fatty acids and also things like amino acids as well. Now, insulin, again, is a peptide hormone, as you see from all the amino acids, and these are released by beta cells. And this allows glucose to enter cells, thus lowering your blood sugar. And again, it's not just the blood sugar part, but the other thing is like, okay, now these glucose molecules are in your cells. What is it going to do? Well, your cells can either burn it up and make energy out of it, or they can store it for later. So what we see with insulin is it's promoting the storage of nutrients versus glucagon, which promotes the liberation of nutrients into your bloodstream. Alright, so then we did cover the basic insulin cellular mechanism. So what we have here is all this glucose, and then we have the beta cells that produce insulin, and then insulin binds to its receptor on these target cells, and you have these target cells everywhere in your body, and then, or almost everywhere, I should say. And then you have the glucose transporters. When it's at rest, when you don't have insulin, these are contained within vesicles in your cells. They're held in reserve. But once you have insulin signaling, this moves them to the surface of the cell, and now it can absorb glucose from the surrounding environment. Okay, and again, this is like the more in-depth. So again, if that seems really complicated, that's the simplified version. I want you to know this simplified version. If you're studying more of the cell and molecular biology, signal transduction, you're studying way too much past the scope of this class. And yeah, actually this is actually more what the reality of insulin signaling is. Insulin receptor, we still have our GLUT4, but again, if you're wondering what the signaling is, it involves all of these things right here. So again, it's not just a simple, okay, just like a little signal. There's many things that lead to the transport of those GLUT4 vesicles. Alright, so then we want to cover this. Again, we have insulin and insulin binding to insulin receptors, and we have all this glucose in the bloodstream. So what's going to happen? Glucose transporters appear at the surface of these cells, And now it can absorb glucose from the bloodstream into these cells, thus lowering glucose in the bloodstream.